Okay, I think it's almost the start time, and thanks everyone coming to our session. This is a staff session and talk about all different types of systems. And we have 7 speakers, and we have 5 topics. Okay, and then we also have a recording today. So, and if you have we will do the talk first, and then we will address the questions and answers at the end for the 10 minutes. And thank you everyone coming to our session. The first one, yes.
Well, hi everybody, thank you for coming. I'm going to give a whirlwind look at FOLIO, the Future of Libraries is Open. FOLIO, which is a library services platform being built by a community of libraries and vendors in the industry. And what I want to do today is give you just a quick overview of where we're at, what our next few months are going to look like, a tiny bit about the process of how we do some of our work in the community. A brief show and tell. I was tempted to try to do a live demo of the system, but I think in a really constrained time frame that was going to be a bad idea. So I did some screenshots instead, particularly some functions that may appeal to folks at Charleston a little more, around e-resource management, things like that. And then and a little bit about our longer term plans, unless my timer goes off before the so where is the FOLIO project right now? Who's heard of FOLIO here? Awesome, and so have I. FOLIO is in July 18th, 2019, right before ALA Annual, we had a really productive face-to-face series of face-to-face meetings where we really consolidated around this concept of trying to get really some market-viable library services platform for the academic market by summer 2020. And with that were some goals of having at least 5 libraries implementing that over the summer, and having a set of features that a library could replace their old library management system. Maybe not with all the whiz-bang that we're promising and really working on with FOLIO yet, but so you're not completely struggling when you make that switch. So that it's good enough to make the switch, but it'll be some risk takers and early adopter mindset to make that happen. So we're doing pretty well. We really spent a lot of time scoping out all the features that needed to be in that market viable product. Compared that with the developer hours and other people hours we had available to us, and really had to sort of do some down in the dirt fighting for some of the stuff at the end of those lists to really make sure we weren't excluding something that would really kind of be a make or break item. And then the institutions involved have had to really review those lists and make sure they know what they're committing to and are comfortable with. And we've got more than 5 libraries sort of signed up to implement the MVP. It's looking pretty cool. Chalmers University in Sweden has implemented FOLIO October 1st or September 30th. I don't remember what day exactly. So they're kind of in the throes of that. And as any of you have been through a library management system implementation, you always have the throes of it in any case. And so they're submitting bug reports all the time, uncovering things nobody thought to ask for that we now need to ask for. So a lot of the development has been around kind of making sure Chalmers can be really standing their library up there. But overall, they're super happy with what they did. So, I already spent way too much time on that part. So what we do in the community is we take the things like librarians have thrown out that we needed to do this and that and this and that, and come up with big lists of stuff. So like we take this ability to manage administrative information and contact information for vendors and publishers. That gets translated into a ticket of some functionality that a product owner describes in a way that developers can work on. The developers then take that and build that functionality. So here we've got a contact record for attached to a vendor, or what we call an organization in FOLIO. And with all the kinds of information we hope to want there. So we've done hundreds of these features described this way and put them together to make FOLIO. So I want to show a few, FOLIO is built on a microservices platform, so a lot of small applications that do one or a small number of functions, but it could be a library staff member works in the orders function most of their day, or in the courses, or checking in or checking out, that sort of thing. But these also need to interact behind the scenes so that data is in the right place. We know that the book's checked out when we look it up in a different part of the system, for example. I want to touch on a few of these, in particular how we bring information together to make the most use of what we've got. And so agreements, e-holdings, licenses, and orders can all sort of interact to say take Duke ebooks. We buy a new package of those. There's an agreement we set up in FOLIO that describes the business rules around that agreement. To that, we can attach, in our e-holdings system, we attach essentially a package, and in Cornell's case, this will be linked into EBSCO's knowledge base. So we're not storing the data about all the Duke ebooks in our FOLIO system that's in the EBSCO knowledge base. But we link that to the agreement in FOLIO, so there's a direct connection between those two things, which in the e-resource universe hasn't really been there. And we can, my time's almost up, so to that we can also attach, when I get down to it, a purchase order, which then links the payments to that actual list of resources. And a license record, which is the terms of use and things like that. So, last but not least, these are just some screenshots of what FOLIO looks like, and this is our long-term strategy, which I can talk about in Q&A if anybody cares. So thank you.
Thank you.
There we go.
It is showing up on the projector. You need to pull it to the left a little bit to get to your...
I got it.
Okay.
Found the mouse.
Okay.
Oh, this one. Okay, that's cool. Okay, great. All right, so we're going to talk about the role that libraries play in connecting users to licensed online resources and show some solutions for streamlining that access. I'm going to briefly share some findings that we got from a recent study we did at Boston College around discovery and access. And then Kendall is going to talk about how LibKey can be utilized to streamline access for our users. So we recently collaborated with the University of Notre Dame on a study where we interviewed PhD students around discovery and access and their pain points. One of our findings, perhaps not surprising to anyone in the room, is that students struggle with getting access to full-text content for licensed resources in our library systems, particularly article content. And we found that, also probably not surprising to people, students start their access journey sometimes on library search or in library databases, but often in other places, and we found them starting all over the place, from social media, from Google Scholar, from very often citations in the back of a book or in an article, and very often a written or verbal recommendation from a faculty advisor, a colleague, a friend, or somebody they met at a conference. You guys are all going to do this at the conference today. You're going to scribble something down, you're going to Google it, and you're not going to get to the full text. So we found that their issues were not so much with discovering resources, but with accessing resources. Again, not a huge surprise. So here's some quotes, and I'll just let you guys read these, but you can sort of see, you can sense the user frustration coming through here. The first quote describes the pathway of starting at the library and navigating through the library's link resolver. Link resolver, two of the most scary words in the library business. So one click should be enough, I think is the quote here. Incidentally, this user was a self-professed fan of Sci-Hub and really likes the fact that it's one-click access. And I think the last quote really sums up what we heard from users, which is, I could find the articles, but I couldn't read them, right? So that's the problem. After our study, Boston College has really pivoted from discovery to access, and we've been starting to put a lot of staff resources into solving access, not solving discovery. And one of the tools that we're finding to be incredibly useful and powerful for us is the one that Kendall's going to do.
Great. So I'm the CEO of the library technology company, Third Iron, and really we see the objective as trying to meet user expectations by simplifying and expediting access, but always keeping the libraries at the center of the research process. And we think that we should do that by, first of all, showing users the access options at point of discovery, not like, hey, you might be able to get access here, but you can actually get access. And then also providing immediate access to that content. Simplify the process by removing the steps to get access to that content and so forth. So we do this in a few ways. One is with APIs. So we have an open set of APIs that can integrate into any platform that will allow API integration to occur. We have this across all the major discovery platforms out there, Primo, Summit, EDS, soon to be OCLC, and other ones like that. And as you can see here, we indicate at the point of discovery what the action is. Can I get the PDF, or can I read the article, maybe in HTML? And when you click on that, you go to the PDF or you go to the article. There's no intermediate or intermediate steps there. So we think that we should be trying to provide awareness and then immediate access at the point of discovery in things like library systems. If they're not API ready, like Google Scholar might be an example, but you have your library links set up, you can actually integrate our libkey service there, so we resolve first against libkey, meaning that when I click on that library link, rather than going to your link resolver, we go immediately to the PDF of the content, right? So we're using it in sort of non-API ready systems. And then also to address the question of what happens when people are going to open web searching, we have a browser extension as well. The nice thing about this is that at the point of discovery, Wikipedia, publisher page, wherever I might be, it's signposting, it's notifying for me what content is available. I can download the PDF, I click on it, I go right to the article. So again, we're keeping the user in the library, even though that they're not in the library per se, right? Because we're connecting out through resources. We've had this now available for just over a year. Some intrepid librarians out there are actually starting to measure some of the results, and these are just a few. One of which we find people click on these links all the time. Boston College is a great example. You give the users the option of how they want to access content. Guess what? The most simplest, fastest, easiest, and accurate way to get access to content, that's what they will choose. Over the last 30 days, we've served up over 2.5 million full-text objects via libkey. Doesn't sound like a lot really, but we only work with a handful of libraries at this point. So we know that there's a profound impact in terms of what users are doing. Second is by providing better access, it reduces help desk load on the libraries. Manchester reports that their help desk tickets have dropped by 25% because people aren't contacting the library and saying, why can't I get access to this? The open URL link failed. What happened here? Blah, blah, blah. And then second is saving researchers time. Again, Manchester has calculated that they're able to save their researchers in aggregate 112 days of research time. That means that all those seconds and minutes that users are trying to click through links and go here or try to do whatever, they save all of that time with a one-click access to PDF content. And when the library tries to measure their impact back to the community, it's on those measurements. It's things like time savings and reduces on help desk tickets. Thanks.
Start up my timer. Start my stopwatch. All right, so my slides have time pieces on them, so it may not move, it may move without me doing it, and if I need less time, I'll just advance it. My name is Nettie Lagace. I work at NISO. We are the National Information Standards Organization, and I want to tell you about a project I worked on for a few years with a number of people on a working group creating FASTEN, which is the Flexible API Standard for e-content NISO. It's out now for public comment. This came out where Readers First is an initiative that came out a few years ago that provided principles on user access to content, where libraries want to provide an interface to content that's provided by other vendors, so video vendors, ebook vendors, and so on, creating their own interface, a single interface for users to access content. But it's difficult when each vendor has its own API connections, and libraries are trying to develop an interface. Based on that, they have to redevelop pieces from each vendor to vendor, and it's very time consuming. Wouldn't it be great if there's an overall recommendation that everyone adopts that makes it easier to do this? So from a library perspective, it's difficult. Also, it's difficult from a user perspective. So they're looking at all of these, they're taken into different interfaces, and they don't know how to use them. So problems with, from a technology side, dealing with different vendors. Even just the coding is one piece, but then the vendors have their own timetables, their own release schedules, their own features, and sometimes it's hard. So this group got together actually 3 years ago. It's been a little while in the making, but it's been very in-depth and a great learning experience for everyone involved, where the goals for the working group are to create a recommendation for how e-content vendors should adopt APIs for better integration with library ILS and discovery systems. So there's a list of different processes that go on that library discovery systems created by a library or a vendor may adopt for accessing different vendor content, and then the kinds of APIs that are needed. So what kinds of commands could be standardized that would make it easier for development of communication between these two interfaces. All right. So the group took quite a long time to look at different user interface problems, and then what are the available solutions. It didn't want to create a brand new recommendation, actually wanted to adopt materials that are already out there. So SIP and NSIP are kind of old, but they had commands that are well understood, that are well adopted. In the end, the group has adopted LCF, the Library Communications Framework from BIC, the Book Industry Communication Group. It's a UK-based organization. It's optimal because it's RESTful. It's not old-fashioned. It's got more up-to-date user things. So the guiding principles of FASTEN are what you see here. So patrons should be staying in the library interface as much as possible. They're not going to be taken out to different e-content vendor interfaces. Ideally, there's one login. You log in once, and it saves your information for all the different further commands. Patron information is not sent to the e-content vendor. It stays on the library side. And then e-content providers should provide different kinds of information that basically allow the discovery layer to do things like group records. So if you want to group records for a particular set, you can do that on the library side. License type information should be sent so people in a consortium can see what their access is for various things, and the library should have control over titles. So there's different independent tasks that FASTEN is based on. There's 3. Authentication, which I have here, you can take a look at it. It's a little bit, there's several steps that are involved, but it's kind of, the basics are what I mentioned before. A user logs in once, and that session is persistent, and then little information about them is sent to the e-content vendor. Resource synchronization, this takes place where the records are sent to the discovery provider. So you can imagine when you're requesting things, it might take a while. Participants on this group, we've had a very wide-ranging group, some public library participants, some university library participants, consortium participants, suppliers from different various vendors, and then technologists of different sorts. And their document is available at this URL. It takes you to the working group page. Please download it, and you're very much invited to provide comments on this through the end of this month. And I'm happy to take questions at the end. Thank you. Kind of makes it easier when the slide advances forward. It sort of takes you by surprise sometimes too. That's what I did. I was guessing. FASTEN. Oh, LCF. Library Communications Planning. Oh, not very long. Here. To see Josh.
Hello everyone. Our topic today is about e-resource troubleshooting, a staff strategy, training strategy. I'm going to just talk about some general issues with troubleshooting, and then Christee will talk about staff training perspective. Okay, why did we choose this topic? As much as we try to avoid any e-journal, e-resource access issues, it happens quite often, and oftentimes it requires immediate attention. Some problems are easy fixes, but a lot of others are require are complicated and requires analysis and a lot of staff time. And most importantly, troubleshooting the process itself directly affects patrons' experience with library resources. And how are issues reported? A lot of issues are reported by our public services librarians, which are usually happens in an urgent manner and with that big exclamation mark in the email. And a lot of them, also quite a few comes from our interlibrary loan staff members. And some of our identified by our e-resource staff when we do, journal or reconciliation on an annual basis. We try. And just based on the reports, we roughly divided issues into 4 types that kind of helps us, with staff training, how to target those the troubleshooting, apply the strategies. So the first type, authentication issues, the user are the user current, faculty, staff, students. The IP issues are is the user off campus, on campus. Is it all IPs are affected, or just certain IP? Certain IPs, are not working. This type of issue could be involved with publisher. Sometimes it's for whatever reason the IP got dropped out of the from their end, and it could be the agent maybe getting forward updated list of IPs, and sometimes it's on us. Libraries, we may not be aware our new IP ranges or some changes. And the second type of issues are dealing with library systems, like link resolvers, the iOS, and discovery tools. Sometimes we get a report that, okay, we find this article in Discovery Service, but it's not opening. Okay, bad links. So it could be the Discovery tool problem, or it could be link resolver problem. Okay, and then another very common type of issues are coverage, the content entitlement. Do we make payment? Do we sign a license? And a lot of times, yes. But somehow we just don't have the courage. Okay, so then we have to go from there and just figure it out. And last, very short, just it's a content within the publisher's site, which they need to fix.
Okay, I'm gonna talk really fast, apologies. And I may not finish, so you may have to just ask me questions later. In my mind, e-resource troubleshooting lives at the intersection of traditional continuing resource skills and technology. So when I'm thinking about a staff training plan, I'm trying to think about those two things. So, you need to understand e-continuation's infrastructure, renewals and payments, licensing, holding entitlement information, access points. For a monograph person, these are all foreign concepts. Understanding e-resource content structure, the difference between aggregator databases and single title journal owners, right? Owned content versus access-only content, post-cancellation entitlements. Technology, so all of the 4 categories that Lee just talked about, as well as things like vendor administrative interfaces, managing access points. Communication, and that would include internal and external. So internal would be within the department. It could be working with the other departments in the library that help troubleshoot, so our systems, or public services. And then external would be faculty, students, and other staff, as well as vendors. And I can't stress how important good communication is. These problems don't get solved when people don't know how to ask the right questions or provide the right information. Priority. E-resource troubleshooting is time sensitive, so when you think about a training plan, you need to determine the level of priority for this work at your library, and it's different for every library. I want to stress that. Everybody says, we need to fix this as soon as possible. Well, as soon as possible really does differ depending on how many staff you have and how much oh, and I'm done. Sorry.
Am I doing that right, or did I just need to push present?
Yeah.
Okay, let's bring it back in. You could have used that time, couldn't
That's okay.
Yeah, just keep talking until he's.
There we go.
Yeah, right.
So, I know you're probably thinking that this is a presentation about systems and systems librarianship. It's not, okay? I'm talking about, you can leave if you want. I realized after I had conversations with multiple librarians in the last couple of days that there was a little confusion over that. I'm talking about system thinking and system theory in regard to administration and management. And so, basically, what the big focus of this is systems theory and systems thinking is kind of second and third order thinking whenever you're doing any kind of managerial decision making and administration. And so as we talk about this, we want to make sure anytime you're making a big decision when you're in administration or management, I think it's important to have a theoretical foundation of management theory and to be able to implement that in practice. And so basically what systems theory is and systems thinking is, it's understanding that you live in and work in a bureaucracy and an organism that is closer to a systematic design than it is just a hierarchy of control and command. Okay, so basically what that means is a library is a subsystem of higher education. Higher education is a subsystem, if it's public, of a state, part of the state government. So for example, I used to work at Georgia Tech, and this is part of the USG system, which is one subsystem of the state government. The academic library is one subsystem of that. And in every library, there are different subsystems and systems. So for example, acquisitions, e-resources, research consultations, reference, across the board. All right, and so this really started, you don't want to read that, we don't have that much time. It's brand new, okay? So basically, in the past, bureaucracies and organizations were all about hierarchy, control, and command. So this came out of the German military in the 19th century, and more than anything, it came from Max Weber in the 19th century, and it was all about planning, control, command, efficiencies, and minimizing waste, all right? And so the best way to think about this, it was a pyramid, right? It's very hierarchy, and it's about controlling for chaos. You've probably heard of scientific management. This was Taylor in 1911, I think. And basically what he was saying was every task has to be done, everyone has to be completely controlled. And that's not really how management works, especially in the 21st century. But not everybody needs to do the same thing, all right? And you don't need to manage everybody in a library the exact same way. So everything should be equitable, but it can't be the same. So for example, if you were in my department at Princeton, I would say across the Princeton University libraries, 1/3 to 2/3 of the staff are union, and so they have to punch a clock. They have to have a mandated 15-minute break, two mandated 15-minute breaks, a mandated hour. I cannot have them leave early if I wanted to let them. This is way outside of scope. But my domain experts, some of my reference librarians, they can come and go as they want. And as long as they're getting the job done, that's the most important part. And so systems thinking is a way of trying to understand that while everything may be somewhat different across the board, it's all interconnected and it all works together. And so this is a way to try to understand that there's a lot of complexity and chaos in academic libraries and just across the board. Let's skip that too. I think this is a really great way to think about higher education in academic libraries, because there are so many different departments within an academic library that have a certain niche that have to be managed differently. You can't have a paternal, tightly coupled policy across the board that impacts every department the same, and I see this at every institution that I've ever worked at, that something comes down from the top, and that is assumed to impact everyone the same. But this is more of having a systematic way of thinking about the decisions that are made. And so praxis is taking theory and implementing it into practice. And so this is probably not what y'all came to hear, because you probably thought I was a systems librarian. I'm not. I'm the director of the Stokes Library for the Woodrow Wilson School of Public Policy at Princeton, but maybe out of this random conversation you learned something. So that's it. I'm finished. You could have used my, oh wait, I have one. Should I just sit up here and talk?
Show the slide.
Show this.
Don't worry, I used it up earlier.
Okay. Oh, I closed out.
So,
It wasn't that good. Why don't we just use that?
Does anyone have questions for any or all of us? We could all try to answer the same question.
I have one. This is a folio question. Should I just go?
Yes, go for it.
Full disclosure, I work for EBSCO, so we're super interested in folio, obviously. My question is, how's it going? You showed some slides that look good. It looks like it's doing what it's supposed to, but what's your impressions of it so far?
My impression is it's going great.
Okay.
A lot of great work has been done. There's a lot of great work ahead of us. I'm confident in that summer 2020 for some libraries to really go live. Then it's going to be kind of seeing what happens in the next sort of year or two after that as we try to spread the word.
I also have a folio question. What is the state of the market cat? At last I looked at it, was not ready yet at all. I saw it on your little list there. What is the state of that?
State of the what?
The mark and catch feature of folio?
To my understanding, and I'm not the or an expert on it, but the functionality is built and their current process is trying to get it integrated into the core folio code. And so they each sort of couple of weeks they bump into some different problems, but they make it a little further. I believe it is tapped for this, I think December 22nd or 18th or something like that is the sort of fourth quarter release for FOLIO, and that'll be the next time we see if it all got in there, but it's supposed to be. So I would say, take a look again either early January or right at the end of December, and hopefully you'll leverage it.
Awesome.
Anybody else want to answer that?
What's the market catch?
Mark Cat.
Mark
So Mark
Cat.
Mark Cat.
Oh,
Cowboy.
oh,
It's a
okay.
cowboy.
That's
I do know what.
So it's an interesting because Chalmers University didn't need it.
Yeah.
So that was helped them implement when they did, because they do all their cataloging in the Swedish National Library catalog
Okay.
in BitFrame, and then bring in the bits they need to do circulation and acquisitions out of that they don't actually need to mark records in the system. It's one of the cool things about FOLIO is you can actually work in different places and bring in the parts you need to do your day-to-day business.
Absolutely.
I have a question about systems approaches. What are some of the sources of your theoretical foundations?
So it mostly starts, in public administration and sociology. It's very interdisciplinary, but if you want to read deeper, it mostly starts with Katz and Kann, 1966. So pretty much all the literature up until the late 30s and 40s was a scientific management approach, maximizing efficiencies and not really thinking about effectiveness without human relations. So in the 60s, or the 50s and 60s, it started being focused more on human relations, and Katz and Kann are the foundation of systems. It was systems theory, but now it's more of a tool in your toolbox for management, I think. Just having a more layered approach.
Still have 4 minutes.
That's it, I'm not.
We still have 4 minutes. It's an informal conversation.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah.
Of Nettie?
Sure.
So what are the next, so if you're open for comment now?
Yes.
with this, and what are, like, if this gets adopted and so forth, what are next steps for getting people to adopt it?
Yes.
Vendors particularly.
Yes, so many NISO projects, well, all NISO projects before they're published have a public review period. And so this is in its public review phase. We receive comments, the working group will review them, evaluate them for inclusion in the recommended practice, or say thank you, but you already thought of that. Then probably early in the year, the document would be approved by a NISO topic committee, which is an area, and we will publish it. At that time, we'll create what we call a standing committee, which is sort of like a working group, but with a different mandate to publicize, promote, support the document. So they're made up of industry stakeholders, so they're the best ones best placed to talk to stakeholders for adoption.
Christine, do you want
No, I do not know.
Pick up exactly where you left off.
I know that part is I could, but I won't make it.
Yeah, I just have a question about the system thinking. I did attend all of them. So what system thinking mean for all of you who work in systems? How you apply the principle of it in your daily organizational work?
I'll jump, actually, one thing that was really resonating for me is the difference between managing union and non-union, exempt, non-exempt, whatever you want to call it, paraprofessional, professional staff, which is something I think we all struggle with in our libraries in terms of equity and differences, and yet trying to make it seem like we're all the same. So I really liked hearing you say that they're not the same. They do need to be managed differently, and we need to acknowledge that, and by not acknowledging it, we're just sort of, we do this a lot at my library, we pretend everybody's the same, and we try and have a consensus organization, but there is a system there, and we need to acknowledge that system and be honest about it, and make sure everybody understands the role they play in that system.
I think that's the most important part.
Yeah.
It's a clear, open, transparent communication about the a role.
So it was, so I'll take that back to my management practice, and so thank you for that.
Can I have a follow-on question? What the main challenge you faced in system thinking approach and organization?
I think it's just one tool, right? And in management and any kind of organizational design, I think it's somewhat dangerous when people try to over-apply a theory or a technique, and it should just be one tool in your toolbox. That, and I will say that with agile project management, anything across the board, it is specifically for specific, said that twice. It is, the right tool for the right job. And so if you're trying to apply systems thinking to everything you do, then it's going to fail completely. And there's a lot of critiques because people have done that in the past. But it's a way to analytically think about that you're interconnected to other things. So if you're a university librarian and you create a paternal policy that's pushed down because you're trying to, say for example, you have a work from home policy that you don't want and people are abusing. And so you say, all right, let's get rid of the work from home policy to take care of that instead of having your managers having conflict management meetings with the people who are abusing the policy. And so that would be a more systematic approach to making sure that you're not negatively impacting everybody else across the organization, which I've seen happen at multiple institutions. Yeah. And so it's just easier to have a blanket statement instead of having those really difficult conversations that may take a year to change the behavior because it's easier, but it ruins morale.
Okay, so it's pretty much our time. So let's give applause to our speakers.